Hello. Today I'm going to show you the first step in tanning your fish, which is going to be just to remove the skin from the fish. Let's take a quick look at some of the tools we might be using. You could probably do this entire thing with just a dull kitchen knife. You are going to be removing the skin with both knives and with your hands. Another option for a knife would be, this is a slate knife that I like to use. Like the kitchen knife, it's dull. I couldn't cut my hand with it. It feels pretty sharp, but I couldn't really cut my hand with it. You may have an ulu knife around your kitchen. These are pretty good for tanning. And for scraping the skin once we get it off of the fish, you can use a plastic drywall knife. You can use a metal drywall knife. This one I've altered by shortening it down and by making the edge curved. There's also tools that you can use to get the scales off, or you can pretty much just do that with your hands too. Nice natural bristle brush would work for that, or this is purpose-made scaling tool. So let's have a look at the first steps in taking the skin off, which is just to get an edge of the skin off up near where the gill slits were. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my knife and working up here on this Chinook salmon skin, I'm going to just try to get the knife in between the skin and the flesh, leaving as little flesh on the skin as possible. One thing you'll notice as you're doing this is that the skin is probably stronger than you thought it was. So don't worry too much about ripping the skin. You probably could not rip this with your hands if you tried. But I'm just trying to get an edge up like so. And I'm working that knife in between the flesh and the skin. And again, this knife is so dull it couldn't really cut the skin, and that's why I'm using a dull knife. So now I've got the edge up, and I'm leaving only a little bit of flesh on the skin. Our next goal is basically to try to get enough of this edge up that I can grab onto it with my hands. So you're going to hold the fish down with one hand, grab the edge of the skin with the other hand, and really just try to pull it right off. Look at that. So yes, I'm leaving a fair amount of flesh on here, and yes, it's kind of unsightly when you cook this fish if it's all torn up like this, but at least we're going to get a good skin, and this stuff I'm going to scrape off, and I'm going to fry it up and eat it for lunch. So believe it or not, most of this process is going to just go all right with just pulling. But if you get some of the belly meat here that wants to stick, you can try to cut that back so it doesn't stick so badly. So again, just holding down the fish with one hand, pulling with the other. You can also get your fingers under here like this and just kind of push your fingers along underneath the hide as best you can. And there we have it. Skin's off, no cuts in it at all, and I've got a nice lunch here once I scrape this off. Alright, so I put the fish in the fridge, And let's go after the big stuff first on this guy. So again, I'm usually just holding down the fish with one hand and using your tool of choice. You're just going to scrape this flesh off of the hide. You can use a lot of other tools for this too. I could probably use this slate scraper like so. I could also use a plastic drywall knife for this. I could use an ulu if this thing was clean, or I could probably just use a regular table knife. So now we've got the bulk of the flesh off. The stuff that I'm going to eat's in a bowl. We'll set that aside. And let's look at what's left on here. You've got some small pieces of meat. You've got some gray stuff here and there. And there's usually even more of that. You can see some of that gray stuff right here. And then you've got some kind of fatty deposits here right along the spine. So we can just go with the same techniques we used before and just scrape this off. I could also hold this tool a little more vertically and scrape like this. This is probably good for getting that gray stuff off. And you really want to get everything off that you can. There's also, if you can see here, what looks like very fine strings or threads here. And they go in kind of a crisscross pattern. Those, don't try to scrape those off. That's basically the nature of the skin. The skin's like that all the way down, so you'll never scrape those off. Near the tail, there's often some harder to get off and thicker strings. If they don't come off easy, don't worry about them. You can also see here on the table that many of the scales are coming off. That's the nature of salmon. The scales come off real easy. So I'm getting most of that gray stuff off. I'm getting all of the flesh off. You may find the fish is real slimy. Some fish are slimier than others. So if the slime is making it hard for you to hold on to the fish, you can just wash the fish with a little cold soap and water. This whole process has to be kept pretty cold. Don't do this on a hot day out or on a hot piece of metal or anything like that. Don't do it in the sun. Try to keep it fairly cool. Okay, so now it looks like I've got most of the flesh off of here, but I'm not too sure, so I'm just going to give it a quick rinse, and I'm going to clean my work surface. That's the other thing that this type of scraper is good for. It's nice to be able to keep a nice clean work surface, and so just a quick scrape with this. A little bit of water. It's going to give me a nice clean surface. So let's have a look at this hide. I didn't get all the gray stuff off. You can see little flecks of it here and there. There's some stuff I might want to clean up. But really, this small amount of little stuff, this will all come out during the process anyway, so it doesn't have to be super meticulous at this point, and it can still come out just perfect. But try to get any chunks off, try to avoid creating any tears in the edge, like that right there. That'll be a weak spot for when you're doing it further. And just have a look, see if there's anything you missed. Clean it up and flip it over. At this point, many of the scales are already just gone off of it, and there's a few ways that we can work on the scales to get the rest of them off. Number one, we could take any of these scrapers and just scrape. Just go real gently. You can scrape both ways. See what works. Each fish is different. Salmon, the scales come off real easy. Some other fish, it's nearly impossible to get the scales off. And if you don't get them all off at this point, they'll come off eventually. So don't get too worried. The scales sit in these little areas called scale pockets. And those scale pockets are going to make a cool pattern on your skin when you're done. So you don't want to scrape too hard at this point, just because you might damage the scale pockets. So I've gone over it once with the slate knife. You could go over it with a fish scaler, like this. See what you missed. Or that's what this brush is for. This brush will help pick up and pull out any of those scales that we may have missed. I'm not going for 100% of scales here. Just get most of them off. The rest will come off eventually. So that's about it. Give it a final rinse. Cold water always. Get this off the work surface. And at this point, you know, if you're just doing one skin and you've got all your stuff ready, as far as your tannins or other things you might be using, then you can just start tanning this. This is ready to go. But when I do skins, I'm usually doing 50 or 100 at a time, at least the scraping part of it. And so what I do is I roll them up individually. So each skin basically gets rolled up like this. Then I put them on a cookie sheet with some wax paper in between any layers of skins I might have. And then I freeze the cookie sheet. Then I take them off of the cookie sheet and put them in a Ziploc bag. This way, if you've got, 20 or 100 skins, you don't want to just plop them all into a bag. They'll be one big frozen mass and they'll be hard to thaw. But if you freeze them separately and then after they're frozen, put them in the bag. That way they'll stay separate in the bag and you won't have to worry about thawing them. They'll thaw real easy and you can see how many you've got, and it's just that much easier. But for this single skin, I'm just going to put it in there on its own. I'm not going to worry too much about it. Rinse this bag off. And that's pretty much it. Hi, this video is going to be about pre-tanning steps. These are things you do after scraping, but before putting your skins in the tannins. The reason behind doing or skipping these pre-tanning steps is covered in the first video in this playlist, which is called Bark Tan Fish Leather Talk. The pre-tanning steps I'm going to cover here today are 1. Baiting using Oropon, and 2 will be liming. So to start off with, I've got the salmon skin from the previous video, and I've got a package of Oropon here, and I'm just going to follow the directions on the package. It's going to say 2 teaspoons per gallon. So you're going to get 2 teaspoons of Oropon. And I'm going to mix it with 1 gallon of warm water. Now when I start out, this water is at about 80 or 90 degrees, so I don't want to put my fish skins in it. I want to always keep the tanning process at 70 degrees or below. So while this cools, let's have a look at liming. Now liming is a step that I use sometimes for skins that are very oily, and liming helps to kind of break down the oils and fats or anything that might be in that skin that's going to prevent tanning. And liming also swells up the skin and can help us to remove scales. So I've got a few nice ling cod skins here, and these are notoriously hard to get the scales off of. So we're going to put these in some lime to help the scales come off. So the lime I'm using is called hydrated lime or slaked lime. It comes from the hardware store, and it's used by masons. So that's the type of lime I recommend. We're going to mix it with cold water, and so here I've just got a tub of cold water. I'm going to put a heaping tablespoon of lime in there, and then I'm going to stir it. Now, pots that you use for lime and even stir sticks that you use for lime will somewhat get crusted with the lime solution. So you may want to have separate containers and separate stir sticks just for lime. It's a pretty powerful chemical. It's very high pH solution that you're making, so you also want to be careful not to get it in your eyes or in your mouth, and don't get much on your hands, and if you do, just rinse it off. So when you mix the lime powder with water, it'll dissolve. And as this settles, we'll see if there's any lime left in the bottom. Alright, now that the lime has settled and dissolved, I can check to see if I've put enough in just by stirring it up and noticing that, yeah, there's a bunch of white powder at the bottom. So that means that this water's got all the lime in it that it can take, and there's some extra lime in there that's not hurting anything. So if I had put lime into water and it all dissolved and there was no more white powder in there, that would mean I hadn't added enough. But now I know I've added enough because there's still some white powder in there. I add a little bit of salt to my lime solutions. So this is going to call for about a tablespoon. 2 tablespoons per gallon. So I'm just going to put a bunch more in there. Give that a final stir. Check the temperature to make sure that it's down below 70. And then I'll just put my skins in. Whenever I'm putting skins into any solution, I'm going to try to stir it at least for the first few minutes. Once this is all stirred up, I'm just going to basically visit it maybe once an hour if I can, or once every few hours if I can't. Give it another stir. Make sure that the skins are not floating above the surface of the water. Just keep them poked down in there. And then I'm going to leave this in here for a certain amount of time. It really is going to depend on what I'm trying to do and the skin. And so for these skins, I'm just trying to see if I can get the scales to come off easier by liming them. So I'm just going to lime them overnight. So we'll set this aside overnight. Skins that are really oily or thick, like a sturgeon skin, might need to be limed for days or weeks even. Most of my sturgeon skins I'm going to lime for a couple of weeks at least. Moving over to the Oropon here, you can see that in the bottom of the Oropon there is some yellow powder. This is not a problem. This is just some cornmeal, which they use, the Oropon enzyme is on the cornmeal. So once the enzyme dissolves, you've just got a little bit of cornmeal left in there. I'm going to take the temperature of this to make sure it's down around 70 degrees. And then I'm going to put our salmon skin in there from the last video. And again, I'm going to stir this for at least the first 5 minutes or so. Then once this is all stirred up, I'll just stir it occasionally over the course of the next few hours. And I find, say 3 hours in the Oropon is going to be just fine. We've got some skins in lime, we've got some skins in Oropon. We're going to give them some time, make sure that they always stay below 70 degrees, and stir them as much as we're able to. I will finish them off in a few hours. The next thing we're going to do is to mix up our tannin solutions. And there are a lot of different ways you can do this. What I do at home is I save tannin solutions from my previous batch, and I start with this. This is a weak-ish tannin solution that was partially used up last time I did some tanning, so I could just start with that, and that's really the best way to go. But I'll show you how to mix up some fresh batch of tannins, and again, there's a number of ways to do that. One of the simplest ways is to grab some of this. This is mimosa extract. It's basically powdered tannin from a tree called mimosa, also known as acacia. You basically mix this with hot water and then let it cool down, and you've got your tanning bath. As far as the amount, what I do is I add mimosa powder and then I measure the amount of tannins using this. It's a type of a hygrometer called a barkometer, and we'll look at that a little later. But if you just want a ballpark figure for mixing up mimosa powder, if you mix 1 gallon of hot tap water with 2 cups of mimosa, you'll get a very strong solution. That'll be about 17 on the barkometer. Plenty strong for anything you need to do. If you used half the amount of powder, 1 cup in a gallon, you'd get about a barkometer 8. And 8 would be a great place to start a weaker solution if you want to start with a weak solution. If you want to know about some more details on tannins and weak solutions versus strong solutions and a lot more detail on all this, check out the first video in this playlist. It's called Bark Tan Fish Leather Talk. So, powdered tannins is one way to go. Another way to go that's real simple, especially for small batches, is just regular old tea. These are tea bags. This is Red Rose Original Tea. And if you have enough tea bags, you need a couple hundred of them, you can tan a fish skin with that. Just as a quick little experiment, I'm going to take 10 tea bags and I'm going to put them in 1 cup of hot water. I'm going to let that simmer for a few minutes, and we'll see what we get for strength later on once that cools down. So tannin powder, tea bags, and we'll get an idea of how many tea bags we're going to need in a minute. But then really the most traditional way is to take bark and boil it. So this is mostly hemlock bark that I get here locally. scrape it off of trees, usually with a tool, something like that. That's a hide scraper. And then chop it up as finely as I can. The finer the better. This is kind of not fine enough, I'd say. And then, so that's one type of bark that I use. Another type of bark that I have commonly around where I live is Sitka spruce. And if you get smaller trees, the bark is nice and thin like this. This super thick bark came off of a 3-foot diameter tree, and it's really hard to work with because it's hard to cut up. But this bark came off of a tree that was more like 4 inches in diameter, and that makes it easy to bust up the bark. The more your bark is busted up, the more tannins you're going to get out of it. So how do we get the tannins out? Well, we're going to crush up the bark. I'm going to crush up the bark into a big pot. And I'm going to put about 1 gallon of bark in the pot. That might have been a little more than a gallon. And again, your bark should probably be chopped up a little finer than this. See how thick that is? That's really not ideal. Once you get the bark in the pot, then you're going to fill it with hot water. I just put hot water in until it reaches the level of the bark. There's no need to put a whole bunch of water in there because we're trying to make quite a strong solution. So now we've got a bucket of bark and water. We've got a bucket of tea and water. And I'm going to bring this to a boil. I'm going to just let the tea simmer after it boils, but I'm going to let this bark boil at a very low boil, just as low of a boil as I can sustain. I'm going to let it boil for maybe a half an hour. Then I'm going to pour out the water into something I can cool it in. This will make a very strong bark solution. Then I'm going to fill this back up with water. And I'm going to boil it again for a half an hour to kind of squeeze the last bit of the tannins out. And then once those have cooled, completely cooled to 70 degrees or so, it's going to be probably tomorrow morning, then we'll take barkometer readings to see how this tool works and to see how strong they are. And then we'll talk about adding our fish skins to that. All right, now that the bark solution has cooled down, we can revisit it. So what we have here from yesterday is the 10 tea bags in a cup of water. We have the first extraction of the bark, and we have the second extraction of the bark. So I boiled it for a half an hour, and I put it in here, the liquid. And then I boiled the bark for another half an hour, and then I poured that in here. So what we should have is a strong, a weak, and we'll see what this is. I think the best way to test your tannin strengths is with this tool right here. It's called a barkometer, and you'll see that it has numbers on it. They go from 1 to 120. And this thing is also called a hygrometer. It floats in liquid, and it tells you how dense that liquid is. So if you float it in pure water, that's what I've got in here now, that's going to float down to a level of 0 tannins in pure water. Let's see what some of these other solutions measure. Okay, let's see what the 10 tea bags in 1 cup of water gives us on the same barkometer. And you can see that that reads just about at a 10. Next, let's see what our strong tannin bath is. This was about equal volume of hemlock bark and water with a little bit of spruce bark thrown in for fun. So, might be a little hard to see, but I'd say that's somewhere like around an 8, I think. And let's try one last time with the second boil. Let's see what we got there. Now you notice that this has got plenty of color in it, but it's got almost no tannins in it after that second boil. So we're down at like maybe under 5, something like a 3. So this second boil is really barely useful. There's only a little bit of tannins in it, but we have a skin that is really thirsty for tannins. A skin that can take up tannins from even a weak solution like this. And that's the skin that we had from the previous episode that was baited. Alright, well now it's the next day. The skin that was in the Oropon, it sat in there for about 3 hours, and then I took the skin out and chucked it in the freezer to kind of put it on pause. I didn't really want to leave it in the Oropon overnight. It was going to be a long time. So that's what we've got here. The skins that were in the lime are still here. We'll have a look at them in a second. So once your skin is done in Oropon, just discard the old Oropon. This stuff is not toxic or anything. It's just an enzyme. So you dump the Oropon out and then just fill this pot with cold water. I'm going to rinse this hide and just have a look at it. It's very floppy. It feels super thin, and it just feels relaxed. It's not rubbery. It's just kind of almost like very wet paper or something. We'll contrast that to what we see with the hides that are in the lime in just a minute. But for now, we're just rinsing out the Oropon, and we're also going to do a step that comes up pretty often in tanning, at least for me, is what is sometimes called scudding. Scudding is just a kind of what you might call a squeegeeing motion. I've got just a plastic scraper here, and then I'm just squeegeeing out all the water that's inside this hide, because that water has all the stuff that the Oropon has dissolved out of the hide. And so the Oropon is there to sort of rinse out a bunch of stuff that we don't want in the hide, and that stuff is still in the hide until we kind of squeegee it out, or until it sort of finds its way out on its own. So I'll put it back into fresh water, give it some more rinse, take it out, one last quick scud. I like to do this scudding technique almost every day when the hides are in the tannin solution. It just helps to push that tannin solution into the hide, push the old solution out, push the new solution in. One more cold water rinse, and it's basically ready to go in tannins. So, I'll squeeze that sucker out. We've got our weak tannin solution. So I'm going to pour that in there. How much do you really need? You know, you don't want the hide to be in there all folded up or scrunched up against itself. You want it to be able to move around a little bit. This is way enough what I've got here. It's probably a full gallon or more for one skin. And so I could get away with less, but really the more the merrier. And as always, once you put something into a fresh solution, you want to get it moving. Stir it around. Doesn't have to be anything too crazy, but you wouldn't want the skin to be folded up on itself. You want all the bits of the skin to have a good coating of this tannin, and as the day progresses, you want to stir this really as often as you can, but really the first 15 minutes or so make a pretty big difference, because if the hide is all crumpled up on itself in the first 15 minutes, some parts of the outer skin are going to get tanned more so than other parts, and this shows on the final product. It's a sort of a blotchiness to the epidermis, or the outer part of the skin. Although this solution is really dark, it doesn't have a lot of tannins in it. It doesn't have enough tannins to inhibit bacterial growth, and so we need to do something about that. And so for a weak tannin solution, pretty much anything under 10, I'm going to add salt. 5 tablespoons of salt per gallon, plus a little bit of soap. I just use any old dish soap. So if I'm going to call this a gallon, maybe a little more, I'll put 6 tablespoons of salt in here. That's 1, 5. Okay, something like 6 tablespoons went in there. And then the soap, I don't really measure it. I just put, like, say 2 squirts or so in a gallon. And then again, we're going to mix this for about 5 minutes. Okay, next let's take a look at the hides that were in the lime solution. Put gloves on. You don't want to get this stuff on your hands too much, and definitely not in your eyes. Here's our lime solution with our hides in it, and take these out. Try not to splash anything. I noticed that this hide is really thick and rubbery. It's probably twice the thickness or more than it was yesterday. That's because the lime has caused it to absorb a lot of water, and it's sort of puffed up. And I presume that lime has dissolved a lot of fats and things out of the skin. I see some of those fats floating on the surface of my lime bath, and as I squeegee these out, as I scud this, I can see that there's kind of a yellowish liquid that's coming out. So that's good. That means we're doing what we wanted to do. The reason for liming these particular skins was I wanted to see if it makes the descaling any easier. So just a quick note on descaling. There's a lot of different tools you can descale with. A brush, a descaler, your regular scraper. But I've had little success in getting the scales off of ling cod, which this is. And so I just wanted to see if maybe the liming would help to pull those scales off of there. So I'm going to spend a few minutes working with a few different tools and see if I can get those scales off. But when I'm done taking the scales off, I need to go through a process called deliming, which is essentially rinsing these things of all the lime, and that takes a while. They were in the lime for something like 12 hours, and so I want to get them rinsing for at least a few hours. At first, I'll just put them in the pot, and I'll run water in there, and I'll change out the water about every half hour to an hour. Once I've done a few changes of water like that, I might let the water just trickle in there for another few hours. And then at the end of all that, at the end of perhaps 6 hours, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to test the pH of the skin itself. And number two, I'm going to add a little bit of vinegar to try to get that final pH down below what my tap water is. My tap water is pH 7-ish or 8, but I want this to be more like 4 to 5 at the end. So I'm going to get scraping some scales, and then I'm going to put all these in water for a few hours. Alright, the limed skins have been soaking in water for about 3 or 4 hours now, and I just want to check them. I've changed out the water several times, and the skins definitely feel less rubbery and thick, but I'd say they still seem a little rubbery and thick. If I take the pH paper and take the pH of the solution, it shows me something like a 5 or 6 pH, which seems to be getting close to where we want it to be. But the real test is the pH of the skin itself. So I'm going to select a very thick part of the skin, and I'm going to cut a tiny little piece off. I'm going to take that piece, and on it I'm going to drip some of this pH indicator solution. And the color of that is not the nice moss green of the pH paper. It is purple. And so that is showing me that the inside of the skin itself, is still at a much higher pH, something like 8 or even 9. So don't be fooled by, oh, I checked the water and its pH is down. That doesn't mean the skin's pH is down. So we're going to leave it in a few more hours. Alright, so the ling cod skins that were deliming have now actually been in the delime bath for about 24 hours. They just were not quite ready last night, and so I gave them another overnight. And overnight I added a little bit of distilled vinegar each time I refreshed the water in this bath. This was to try to get the pH down to something like 4 or 5. It's not critical, but that's kind of the ideal pH to get stuff down to, especially when it's ready to go into the tannin bath. So I'll be happy if it's close. We'll test the pH of the water first, just to see what it's at. And you can see that here, I hope. I'm going to say that that color, based on the chart here, is something like a pH 4. Which is fine. I'd expect the skins to be a little bit higher, so let's see what they're at. I'm going to take out one of these skins, and I'm going to cut a little section off of the thickest part of the skin, which is near the tail. That's it right there. And we'll just put a drop of this pH indicator solution on the cut skin. So yesterday when we tried this, that skin turned almost immediately a dark blue / purple, telling us that it was not where it needed to be. Today, that skin, I think we've gone a little too far. I'd say that's, color-wise, that's something like a 3. So we've gone a little bit too low in pH. I think that's fine. I'll just rinse these off real good, and then they'll be ready to go into their own Oropon solution. So you don't have to do Oropon after you lime and delime. You don't have to do Oropon at all or liming at all, but I've got the stuff. I'm just gonna run it through there. So I'll dump out this water. I'll give the skins a quick rinse. And then I'll put the Oropon in, and we'll let those sit in there for a few hours. Temperatures in this room today are pretty low, and temperature has a lot to do with fish tanning and chemistry in general, because chemical reactions happen faster at higher temperatures. So this is an enzyme. It's chemically getting in there and doing its work, and so that happens more slowly. It might be 50 degrees in this room right now. It's going to happen a little more slowly. So I will leave these in the Oropon till I get back from work, and then they'll come out of the Oropon and they'll go into the weak tannin solution, just like the other skins we've done. I'll just mention that these skins, they've lost all their swollenness. They feel like they're back to where they were when they started, when they were fresh off the fish. So they're floppy, they're not rubbery, they're not swollen. They look similar to what we started with. So that's good. That means our deliming, that's telling us that our deliming did its job. And of course the pH test that we just did tell us that our deliming did a good job, even too much of a good job. When you add vinegar, I'm talking about maybe 1 tablespoon in a gallon or so, maybe 2 tablespoons in a gallon to bring the pH of water down from, say, 7 to 6-ish. We'll let these sit in the Oropon solution, and then they're going to go into the weak tannins along with the salmon skin from the original project. So from here on in, we'll just be tracking the salmon skin, but these lingcod skins, they'll be in there too along with the salmon. Alright, our salmon skin has now been in this weak tannin bath for about 24 hours. And although the bath has a lot of color left in it, it doesn't have much tannin left in it at all. If you recall, we started out at a barkometer reading of just 3 or so. And so this skin has sucked up all that tannin. I wouldn't probably be reusing this weak tannin solution at all. And so let's take the skin out of here and have a look at what we've got. The skin has really changed overnight. Not only did it take on this kind of pinkish brown color that you see here, but it's also just feels different. It's not this loose and floppy, fresh off the fish feeling leather. It's got some body to it. I wouldn't say it's got stiffness to it, but it's thickened up a little bit. It's changed color, and at this point, I'm ready to put it into a stronger tannin solution. But before I do that, I just like to give it a quick scud. That's just a scrape to remove all that old weak tanning solution, plus all the salt that's all bound up in there too from when we salted the original bath. We're just going to get all that stuff out of there, and this will also help to remove anything that didn't quite get scraped on the first time around. You'll notice as I scrape this, a lot of liquid comes out. And if I were to scrape with something a little more like a flesh scraper, I'd basically be removing some of this outer stringy stuff and exposing some of the whiter untanned skin in the bottom. I don't necessarily like to try to scrape all this stringy stuff off every day because it's just all strings all the way through. And if you want to clean up the look of the hide and have it not be stringy, it's best to do that at the very end. Then you're just having to scrape the strings off once, We're going to do that at the end by buffing it with some pumice or some sandpaper. But for now, all I'm looking to do is squeegee a bunch of the liquid out of there. I'm going to give it a quick rinse in just plain water. Squeeze it out. I'm going to stretch it back out so it's ready to accept all the new tannin solution that we're going to put it into. So this is the stronger tannin bath from a couple days ago now. It's got some floating chunks in there. This skin is just going to go straight in here. Now this solution, if you remember, had a barkometer reading of just under 10. So that's kind of getting into what I would call a strong solution. With weak solutions, we added salt to keep down the bacteria. But now that this is in a stronger solution, I don't think we need any salt, but it doesn't hurt to just put a squirt of soap in every now and then just to help to keep any bacteria down. Also, the temperature in this room is pretty low. It's ranging between probably 50 and 60. So that's nice and cool. That's also going to help with the kind of antibacterial theme that we need to have. This fish tanning is really, it's all just a sort of a race against bacteria, where once that skin comes off the fish, or once the fish dies, bacteria are starting to grow in and around and on that fish. And those bacteria will eventually destroy the skin. Our job is to get it tanned before the bacteria can destroy it. And so one way that we keep bacteria down is by keeping the temperature low. Always under 70. I like to keep it between about 60 to 70 if possible. And another way that we can keep bacteria down is through pH. When we put it in a very high pH solution like lime, bacteria can't grow in that. When the hide is transitioning from a pH 10 down to a pH 4, the environment of that hide is changing so fast that it's hard for bacteria to get a start in there. And now that we're putting it in tannin solutions, the tannins themselves are antibacterial, and we sometimes add salt as a further antibacterial or soap. So if I was doing this on days where this room was 70 or 75 degrees, I'd have to work hard to keep this stuff cool enough. And I'd be a little bit more worried about leaving it in solutions for longer periods of time than necessary. But with this example, these things have been sitting in their solutions a little longer than normal. But I think that's okay because everything's happening a little more slowly because of the temperature in here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to stir this hide in here for the next few minutes, and then we'll let it sit in here for a couple of days at least before we start checking to see if it's tanned enough. One thing you want to look out for is that the skin is not floating too much above the surface of the water. If I didn't have much liquid in here and this thing was sort of sitting clumped up out of the water like this, then this part's not getting tanned at all. But keeping it submerged is important. If you need to put something on top of it to keep it underwater, rather than putting something like a brick on there, you could put a brick on top of this hide to keep it submerged, but that brick would be pressing the hide flat against itself and pressing it into the bottom of the thing. And that wouldn't allow as much free flow of water and tannins and chemistry to happen. So when I try to weight down my hides, no matter what they are, I'm usually just going to take a pot lid like this, and I'm going to float it on the surface. This way it's keeping the hide from coming to the surface, but it's not pressing it down against the bottom of the pot. It's not pressing the hide against itself. Sometimes I might put something in the pot lid just to weigh it down a little bit. This works especially good in, say, a 5-gallon bucket with a whole bunch of hides in it. Just something to keep it from floating to the surface. So we'll leave it in there a couple days. We'll check on it at least once a day. We'll stir it as often as we can. For me, that's probably going to be once or twice a day. And then we'll continue to see this transformation from fish skin into leather. And in the next episode, we'll talk about testing the hide to see if it's done or not. And we'll go from there. See ya. So, now a few days has passed and we're going to check in with the skins. These have been sitting in my warm house and not in the cold laundry room for about, I think, 3 or 4 days since we last checked in on them. So we're going to have a look at what we've got here. We've got the ling cod skins and the salmon skin in there. We'll start with the salmon skin. It's been in the longest. I think the salmon skin might have been in there for, what, at least 5 days now. And as you'll see here, it looks nice and brown on both sides. It feels thicker and more leathery than it did before, and we're going to do some tests on it to see if it's done tanned. And I don't think it is, but that's why we're going to show you how these tests are done. So in order to do this test to see if the tanning is done, we're going to go back to that thickest part of the skin. That's the tail area. And I've got a lot of stringy stuff here on the tail of my skin, so I'm just going to chop some of that stringy stuff off. And I'm going to cut a little sliver off of the tail end of this. I'm just cutting a piece about 1/4 inch wide or so because I don't want to waste too much of my skin. And so what I'm hoping you can see on here is that the skin is kind of brown on the outside and then it's way lighter brown on the inside, and I would say it's almost white in the very center. So that tells me it's definitely not tanned. That color, you want to see some amount of brown through the whole thing. It doesn't have to be completely evenly brown. The outside will always be a little darker. But while we're here, let's look at another test that I use for fish skin. If it had passed this just quick look test or the cut test, then I'm going to go to the hot water test. So let's look at what that looks like. So in order to do the hot water test, I just run my hot tap water, which is about 120 degrees Fahrenheit. And that is about 49 degrees C. And it could be even hotter, would probably be better for this. And then I just pinch the thing in my fingers and I run it under the hot tap water. And I just let it do that for a few seconds. And then I just start working it with my fingers and bending it this way and that, and compressing it and stretching it, and just observing what happens. Do this for about a minute. And what you see after about a minute is that the skin kind of separates into 2 layers. It's almost like the middle of it turns into just jello or jelly or whatever. And then that means it's not tanned. It's got to be able to survive about 120 degree water. The third test that I sometimes do, and we'll do a little one here today, is I'll just cut off, again, as much as I dare. I want a little bit more for this test. But I cut off a piece of it. Rinse it pretty good in cold water. And then I squeeze as much of the water out of it as I can. And then I just let it sit overnight to dry. And in the morning, I'll just take that and see if it feels like leather, basically. If it dries into a stiff cardboard sort of substance that won't get soft even if I bend it, then it's definitely not done. So I'm thinking it's going to fail that test, but we'll see how that goes, and we'll look at them all together. So another thing we want to do at this point is to take each hide, just look at it and you know, give it a little pull, see if make sure it's not very fragile, or see if you can stretch it out a little bit. Maybe it's been lying crumpled up. You know, give it a nice flat shape again. That's about all you need. Stretch it one way, stretch it another way. Then go ahead and lay it down on your surface if you have one and scud it. So this is just sort of squeegeeing out some of the liquid, and this kind of stretches out the skin and gets rid of any junk that might be sitting inside the skin. You know, maybe the tannins have dissolved some fats away or something, and then you can sort of physically just force anything out of the skin that might be in there. Now that they're all scudded, the other thing is that these things are like little sponges, and they've been soaking up the tannins in this solution. So when we started this tannin solution, if I remember right, we were somewhere like an 8 or 9 on the barkometer. But that was 3 days ago. So let's have a look and see what it is right now. So it's at less than 5 on the barkometer, which is kind of a problem for 2 reasons. Number one, you need a fairly high concentration for tannins to want to kind of be forced into the skin, if you will. There'd be almost like a tendency for them to go in there more, the more concentrated the solution is. And number two, as we mentioned before, this whole thing is a race against bacteria. And bacteria can start to live in something that's down to barkometer 5 or less. So we got a little bit of an issue with our concentration for 2 reasons. So in order to make this weak bark solution stronger, we could do a few different things. If I was working with mimosa extract or other tannin extracts, I could just warm some of this up, mix some mimosa powder in there, let it cool down, put the skins back in. Or if I'm working with bark, I'm more likely just boil up an entire whole new batch of bark and then let it cool down, and then put the skins in that, and that's what I'll probably do. Okay, another couple of days has passed since I strengthened the solution. The salmon has now been in tannins for, I think, 6 days, and the ling cod has been in there a day or 2 less. We've got our samples that we cut from last time, and they're all dry. So I'll just take one of those samples and kind of work it it back and forth a little bit. I'll just kind of work it back and forth a little bit with my fingers and see if it softens up and becomes like leather. This salmon one here, it feels pretty leathery. It actually feels pretty good, but I would say it's still got a kind of a papery cardboard, like very, very thin cardboard. So we'll put that to the side. We'll take this ling cod skin. This thing, you know, we saw that it was definitely not tanned, and so when we handle this, it feels more like stiff plastic. Stiff plastic, sort of like the plastic that a milk jug is made out of. So that's was definitely not tanned, and we knew that already. The skins here, they've been at about 70 degrees Fahrenheit in my house with the lid on, and I stirred them once or twice. I'm talking about the amount of liquid you need to do skins. Depends on, you know, how many skins you got in there. When we first put the salmon in here, there was plenty of room. But now that we've got the ling cod skins in there and some water has evaporated away, these are looking a little too crowded. Can you see how they're kind of folded up, and they're not able to swish around when I stir it? So don't do this. Get more tannin solution, more liquid in there. Let's check in to see what's happened since we last looked at these. First of all, let's see how much tannin is left in here. When I strengthened this solution by basically making up a new batch, I got it back up to about a barkometer 10, and it might have been 11 or 12. And then a couple days later, it's at about an 8. So it has sucked up some, but there's still some tannins in there. So if these are not tanned yet, we can probably just keep on using this solution. I might add a little bit just to bring up the volume slightly. And what I'm often doing is I'll save old tannin solutions that are partially used up and then kind of reuse them. So when I boil new bark, I'll often boil it using an old tannin solution, and or if the tannin solution is still strong enough, then I can just directly reuse it if it's gonna help me out here. Let's take these skins out of here and have a look at what they look like. So here's our salmon skin. Looks about the same as last time. It's still quite floppy and soft feeling on the scale side. Still looking good. At this point, I'll often just take and I'll try to rip that skin down at the tail end just to make sure. If I had any bacterial action going in here, the skin might become a little more fragile. So with care, try to tear a little tiny piece of it. Then, just like I do, or should do, almost every day, I'm going to scud this skin just by squeegeeing out some of this old solution. So we'll add some more tannins to this. We'll put them back in the house, and we'll wait another day or two before we finish off that salmon skin. Alright, it's 3 days later, And what I've done is over those 3 days I strengthened the solution one more time to keep it up around that barkometer 10 that I like to maintain toward the end. We've still got our ling cod skins in here, and I suspect that they are not yet tanned. These things are just thick and hard to tan, so I think you can probably see that there's a white line in the middle there. That means it's not quite tanned. So we'll set these aside, maybe give them a quick scud, and then put them back in the tannin solution. The salmon hide, however, I think is probably tanned. It looks pretty good. I think it was tanned 3 days ago, but we just left it in just to be absolutely sure. So I'll just make a quick little test cut on there. And again, looking at the cross section there, it looks brown all the way through. And so this time I'm going to cut off a slightly bigger chunk for our hot water test, just to be sure. Alright, over at the sink here we're going to run some hot water. And then I'm just going to take that piece of hide and I'm going to rub and kind of massage it and bend it this way and that under the hot water for a couple of minutes. Ooh, it's really hot. After a couple minutes, I'm just going to observe the skin. Basically, you're looking for the skin not to change after hot water. If it starts to pull apart or if it starts to feel kind of gluey, then it's probably not tanned. Last time we did this, the hide separated easily into 2 layers, like a top and a bottom. But now it just seems normal. It hasn't changed from the hot water. So it passed the hot water test, and it's time to move on to what's next. So what's next is going to start with some scudding and rinsing. So the first thing I'm going to do is just lay this hide out on the countertop. Give it a good scud to get rid of some of that liquid that's in it. Next, we're going to just rinse it in some cold water. So now, we've got a hide that's fully tanned. It's been scudded so it doesn't have a whole lot of water left in it. And the next step is to get it partially dried. So in order to get it partially dried, I take a towel. You can tell this has been used for a few tanning sessions. Put that leather on the towel, fold it over, roll it up. And I'm going to toss this on the ground and just stomp on it for a little while. This is further just getting more moisture out of the hide and kind of evening up the moisture content. So it's basically wet leather now. It's a little too wet for our next step though. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hang it here on the line. while we mix up some solutions for what comes next. Okay, for this next step, we're going to be mixing up basically an emulsified oil. This is oil that is oil droplets suspended in liquid. And there's many different recipes for this, but it's very similar, or it's exactly the same as what you might use for a brain tan recipe. So for me, I'm going to start out with about a half a cup of warm water. I'm going to put in 1 egg yolk. Egg yolk is an emulsifier, and it has oils in it. So it allows the oils, when I mix them up, to become little tiny droplets. The other thing I'm going to add to here is about a 1/4 cup of canola oil. So we'll toss that in there. Soap is also an emulsifier, so I'm going to toss just a few drops of soap in there. And then I'm going to mix this up very vigorously. The goal here is to kind of get almost like a frothy liquid. Now I'm going to wait a little while because this skin is still a little wetter than I would like it to be. So I'm just going to go away and let this all sit for a little while this dries out partially. Alright, it's been about a half an hour. This thing is no longer quite as wet as what it was. Still very, very damp. No part of it feels dry. And that's where you want it to be for this next step. We've got our egg, oil, and soap emulsion here. I'm just going to give it another stir. Put that hide in the pot, pour the emulsion on it. And then I'm going to spend maybe 5 minutes or so just kneading this with my hands. I'm going to squeeze it out. I'm going to open it back up again. I'm going to stretch it in various ways. I'm going to put it back in the solution, get it all wet again, squeeze it out again, open it up, stretch it gently, put it back in the solution. And I'm just going to repeat that for about 5 minutes. Now that this has had about 5 minutes in the emulsion solution, I've stretched it, I've kneaded it, I've wrung it out several times, I've scudded it. It's completely saturated with the egg solution. Now I'm just going to take and mostly squeeze out, just so it's not too dripping wet. And at this point, there's kind of 2 paths you can go. One would be to go down the hand softening path, and the other would be to dry it flat, is what I'm going to call it. So for hand softening, the first step in that is going to be basically just to hang it on the line and let it sit there for probably, it's going to depend somewhat on your local temperature and humidity, but I'm going to let it sit there until it feels a little bit like where it was when I first put it into the oil emulsion. It was not dry, but it was not wet. It was that kind of super damp, not dry at all. Once it was in that level of dryness, then I would just take it and start doing hand softening. Hand softening can take a million different forms, but in its easiest form, you can just stretch the hide, say, sideways, and then stretch the hide lengthways, and then stretch the hide sideways, and then stretch the hide lengthways. You can also rub it over the edge of something, such as, say, the back of a wooden chair, and you might sort of rub it back and forth over the edge of a piece of wood or a dull piece of metal. Some people use a cable. They might take a steel cable that was taut, and they would kind of run it back and forth over that cable like so. Once it was dry, after you're basically hand stretching it, you can just do it with your hands just like this the whole time. Just stretch it in various ways. Of course, this is super wet, so it doesn't really show what's happening, but just stretch it back and forth over your hands for hours until it's completely dry. How long does this take depends on your local temperature and humidity, but anywhere from 1 hour to, say, maybe 2 or 3 hours. During that time, you can take some small breaks, but don't let the hide sit all rolled up. For example, one method for hand softening is to roll the hide like this, and then just kind of roll it in your hands like so, and then roll it the other way, and roll it in your hands like so. Then maybe roll it sideways, if possible, and rub it in your hands like so, and so on, and so on, and so on. If you need to take a break, don't leave the thing all crumpled up or rolled up during your break, but instead always take a break with the hide just laid flat, like on a wooden surface or on your countertop. You just do that, and you keep going, and you keep going, and you keep going until it's completely dry, and then your hide's mostly done. That method produces, I think, the softest leather, but it takes a long time, and it takes a lot of elbow grease, if you will. So, another method that you can do is to get a flat, smooth surface. Plywood can work for this. A steel countertop can work for this. I just have this old sheet of plexiglass that I use. So you take your skin, you stick it on the plexiglass, and smooth it out. Smooth it out with your hands. Try to get all the wrinkles out as best you can. Then what I do is I take my plastic scraper and gently, I'm not trying to squeegee out all the liquid, but you see I'm getting a good amount of liquid out of this. I'm going to smooth it out. It's completely flat against the glass. My last pass with the scraper is going with the grain or with the direction from head to tail on the fish. I'll scrape the rest of that emulsified oil off. And then I'm going to take this and put it in a place where it's about 70 degrees and a little bit breezy if possible. So inside the house, in a place that's got some air movement. And I'm going to let it dry 100% completely. This usually takes about 24 hours. After 24 hours, we're going to do some hand softening on it, but not nearly the level that we would have done if we had hand softened it. So check back in about 24 hours. Hi, I have dried this thing completely. It was dry after about 24 hours, but it's actually about a week later now. So the hide is completely dry. It's got a kind of a waxy feel to it from the egg oil solution. And And the backside is pretty darn smooth, mostly because the egg oil solution has kind of glued down all those strings. And I think we'll see some of that stringiness come back as we soften it. Another thing I notice on this is that the surface of it looks kind of almost has like a milky, almost like it's got a film, blurry film over it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go wipe this down with a sponge, and then we'll start softening. Okay, so I got it all wiped down with a damp sponge. And for softening these hides, there's a lot of different ways you can do it, but one simple way is to basically just roll it up, just loosely, and then roll it in your hands like that. And then roll it the other way. And at first I'm making a really big roll, and I'm not really pressing down with my hands too much. I don't want to crease the hide. But as time goes on, I'll probably roll it a little tighter, and I will be a little more vigorous when I sort of squash it down this way. In addition to rolling it back and forth like that, you can also just rub it over the back edge of a chair or anything that's got kind of a 90-degree angle. Kind of go like this. You can also just sort of stretch it sideways a little bit. And then stretch it lengthwise. But really, rolling it like this way and that, is my basic method for softening. So I'll basically do this various methods of softening for about, I'll say about 15 minutes, and then I'll call it good and we'll have a look at it. So about 15 minutes of softening later, I think this thing looks pretty good. Got a couple of creases in it. That was from when I was rubbing it over the chair. But mostly came out good, soft. Still has that kind of slightly papery feel to it. On this side though, you'll notice that all those strings came back. And this is pretty much just cosmetic. There's a lot of different ways we could remove these. But what I usually like to do is I take this, it's like an abrasive rock of some kind. Similar to pumice, you could use pumice for this. You could also probably use sandpaper, you could use a scraper. But just by so you can see that this hasn't completely removed the stringiness, but it's kind of evening it out, and eventually most of this fuzz will kind of be more even on the back of it. So I'll just continue doing that for maybe about 5 or 10 minutes on this hide. So we've pumiced it for another 5 minutes, and it's evened up the look of the back here, the scale side. Looks pretty good. There's occasional scales in there, but this is by and large done. You could wax or oil this with something that, like the similar things to which you might use to waterproof your boots. If you wanted to make it a little more water resistant, a little shinier, you could put warm tallow on it and rub that in as much as you wanted to. It would really change the look and feel of the hide. But that's pretty much it. Hope this helps. Good luck with your tanning.